Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Matthew Reddy. I'm the private sector specialist with the GEF, and this afternoon we'll be looking at the transformational change from the business perspective. And in order to do that, I'd like to invite our business panellists. Our panellists represent a broad range of the private sector, across representative range of the private sector, from the small to the large, technology providers, and those people that have strong geographic representation as well. So first of all, I'd like to call to the stage, if our panellists could assume their seats on the stage. So please welcome to the stage Mr. Bernard Giraud, the President of the Livelihoods Ventures. Dr. Dilip Kulkarni, please Dilip, if you could take your place on the stage. Varun Vats, Dr. Kulkarni is the head of Agri-Food with Jain Irrigation, and Varun is the lead for the partnerships with Syngenta, and also leads the work with the World Economic Forum and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development on climate-smart agriculture. Ms. Madhureni Sek, who's our specialist with the World Bank, thank you, and Gautier Keru, who is the investment director with Mirova. If you could please take to the stage. I think we'll need to use these microphones. You've got one mic up there. Well, I'll just put it there like that. I'll just turn that off. Okay, we'll leave that there like that. They need to be mic'd up. Okay, while our panellists are being mic'd up, usually we say turn off your mobile phones. Not in this session. Turn on your mobile phones. Take a look at this screen. You'll see this URL here, Slido, S-L-I-D-O. So jump into your telephone or your computer, type in Slido. You'll get a welcome screen that says, welcome to Slido. There'll be a little text box, a little dialogue box at the bottom of the screen, and it will ask you to enter a number. And that number is 8887. So if you go to slido.com and enter the code 8887, there's going to be a couple of audience participation polls that you'll see. We'll be using this during the course of the presentation to get some of your feedback on some of the questions and to get some elicitation from the panellists. Well, we heard a great presentation this morning from Prime Minister Modi. I thought that was quite inspiring. We'll be reflecting on some of the things that Prime Minister Modi mentioned today. We'll be reflecting on the Business Day, the GEF, Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and WBCSD Business Day, UNCCD Business Day, which was held on Saturday, and also the Business Declaration from Delhi. Those will be the things that we'll be reflecting on today. But first of all, I'd like to open up for our panel discussion. So for our panel discussion, we'll be asking a number of questions, and there won't be any time for questions from the audience. That's why we're going to be using the Slido application. So Bernard, first of all, thinking about the work that you're doing in the Livelihoods Fund, when you think first of business collaborations, what are the elements, the key elements of success that you need to work with the private sector, and perhaps how does carbon pricing help support you in working with the private sector in sustainable land management?
Well, thank you. Good afternoon. Well, the Livelihoods Funds it's not working. Okay, maybe I can take this. Sorry. Good afternoon. The livelihoods funds are investment funds that have been created by large corporations from the private sector. So I think the good news is that the private sector is changing. They are changing because consumers are changing, because civil society is expecting much more from what consumers purchase. That means that we are at the beginning of a major shift of a paradigm, the paradigm of commodities. In the recent past, over the past, let's say, 50 years, large corporations have sourced their raw material from agriculture as commodities, meaning that we don't know where it's come from and how it has been produced. We purchase quality and price. This is changing. With the technologies that enforce traceability, no company today can ignore any longer where does the raw material they process comes from. Meaning that the social and environmental impact, and especially on land degradation or improvement, is increasingly known, same as the social impact of their sourcing. That means that there is a huge area for cooperation between companies, NGO, public sector governments, public agencies. Because the companies have to transform and not just to do certification. Certification is good because it will protect my reputation against bad practices, but it doesn't transform fundamentally my supply chain. So what is open now is how we will create coalition between public and private partners to help the private sector and to encourage the private sector to go further, to go beyond certification, to really have an impact. So we are talking about transformation. So private sector should not be seen as a kind of provider of CSR money, but more as an agent of transformation. And doing that, they will transform themselves. But for that, we need flexible tools. Private sector cannot work with very heavy bureaucratic processes. We need to understand what are the constraints, the needs, the expectation on the private sector. We need to combine hybrid financing to de-risk part of the private sector. But on the other hand, we can impose much more effort of the private sector to go much further on sustainability with KPIs. And the engine of all our funds is result-based payments. We get paid on carbon that is sequestrated in soils and in trees. We get paid on the volumes of sustainable milk that is produced in Kenya through agroforestry. So I think the investment model, the de-risking, and the result-based payment are a good opportunity and approach to cooperate and to engage more the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bernard. And I think that message that we're trying to get through of transformation, getting out of business as usual, getting away from those approaches that really restrict business and really need to work towards those partnership models, of which the Livelihoods Fund is one of the best examples. So whilst you were speaking, Bernard, in the background we were running our Slido. And if the panelists turn around, you might be able to see the screen. So the question we asked the audience while you were speaking is, what do you think of? What's the first word that comes to the mind when you think of sustainable land management and the private sector? And I think we've got a fairly clear kind of theme going on here right now. So bearing that in mind, we'll come to that question in a moment. But Dr. Kolkani, we'd like to ask you, because there's a lot of discussion around technology. Prime Minister Modi mentioned technology today in terms of cost-effective remote sensing. He mentioned a lot about water resources management and tied quite elegantly that relationship between sustainable land management and sustainable water management. So could you tell us, as the leading irrigation company in the world, what technologies are the most promising for land management? What kind of results can we expect? And are they available to those that need it most?
Thank you. As Bernard mentioned very well, that companies are changing, businesses are changing. And not only businesses are changing, but they can become change agents for transformation. And I think this is very important, because businesses play a great role in introducing, innovating new technologies which can bring transformation. You know that water, soil, and agriculture, they are very much integrated into. Almost 70 to 80% of the water is used in agriculture. And without soil, there can't be any agriculture. So from that point of view, I think how do we manage water, agriculture, and soil in an integrated manner? I think this is very, very important. If you take the case of India itself, almost 70 to 80% water which is available goes in agriculture. And out of the total agriculture land available for cultivation, almost 60% is rain-fed agriculture. It's subject to monsoon, vagaries of monsoon. And rest of the 40% land is irrigated. And most of it, almost 80% of it, is flood irrigated. That is, there's no control over how the water is used. And if you calculate water productivity, in this flood irrigation is hardly water use efficiency of 30 to 35%. So you can imagine how much water we are wasting. But it is not just wasting of water alone. It is how, what it is impacting the soil. That is more important. And from that point of view, I think if there is too much of water in an unirrigated land, there is soil erosion, loss of productivity, loss of organic matter, and desertification. If there is too much of water, there is water logging also, and there is a lot of problems with respect to crop productivity. If there is no water, if there is a drought, there are still more problems from food security point of view. But what about the irrigated land? Even in irrigated land, as I said, 40% land which is irrigated in India, and most of it a similar situation in Africa and other places, you will see that flood irrigation is causing a lot of salinity. Over-irrigation causes salinity in land. If you see the lands in Punjab, Haryana, and parts of Maharashtra and Karnataka states in India, where a lot of paddy and wheat is rotated in Punjab and Haryana in over-irrigated, flood irrigation, the soils have become saline. If you see the district of Abor in Punjab, there is hardly any crop which can come now there. It is all desert. There is all salty soil, saline, and nothing can come there. So such problems are there. If you see the case, in case of sugarcane cultivation in Maharashtra, in western Maharashtra, the lands have become highly saline. You can imagine 63% of the water available in Maharashtra goes for the 3% land, which is sugarcane, which is a criminal waste of water which is happening. And it is not only criminal waste of water, but also the degradation of the land because of the salinity. So it is very important that we introduce new technologies, like what companies like Jain Irrigation has introduced new practices like micro irrigation, like drip. Today, Prime Minister Modi mentioned in his speech that more crop per drop. I think that is the solution for India. It not only increases availability of water, but it also prevents the degradation of the soil. And it is not only providing water as required by the plant and not just irrigating the land. It is the providing water from soil moisture security point of view. I think this is more important from the terminology itself, moisture security in soil. It should not be more, it should not be less. It should be just secure enough for the growth of the plant. And that increases the productivity of the crop itself. Fertigation is another concept which is very important, which we have introduced. That is irrigating along with fertilizer, so that there is no nutrient loss and there is no, if you are giving urea in flood irrigation, most of it is lost. And the water is getting more polluted. So from that point of view, you are doing fertigation through drip irrigation. You are giving nutrients and water directly to the root. And both the water use efficiency and nutrient use efficiency is very much increased. I think this is very important. And there are a lot of agronomic techniques like tissue culture, high density plantation, canopy management, pruning. These are some of the agronomic practices which can be used where we can conserve more soil and water both. So conserving soil and water has to go hands in hand. You cannot control soil conservation without water conservation. So I think from that point of view, I think it is very important that we have an integrated approach in agriculture for soil and water conservation. And there are technologies available. Almost 10% area of India's irrigated land is under now drip irrigation. Another 10% is on sprinkler irrigation. There is huge potential. Almost 40 million hectares of land potential is there for drip irrigation, which can increase availability of water, not only for agriculture, but for industry and for drinking purpose.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dilip. That was a great summary and makes us reflect, I think, on what is often underrepresented in these discussions, and that is the role of water management. These, I suppose, are classed as externalities, issues like salinity, the loss of nutrients, the degradation of land. Those things don't present themselves on company balance sheets. They're on the planet's balance sheet. So I'd like to ask our next panelist, Varun Vats from Syngenta, what do you see as a global agribusiness? What do you see as the role of business in helping address the true value and the true cost of food?
Thank you, Matthew. And thank you, Jeff, for providing us this opportunity to share our perspective. I'm Varun Vats from Syngenta, from External Affairs Department of Syngenta. For those of you who don't know about Syngenta, we are an agriculture input company. We do research, develop, and commercialize seed treatment, and crop protection products. So as you were asking that what would be the role of business, and just before starting, I would say that I second what Bernard was saying, that business are changing because consumers are changing. And with this change, we perceive profit, which is there on the slide, differently. It's not just creation of more profit, it's more of shared value creation. And I can give you examples of that. In Syngenta, what we are looking at now, as I said, like we are a research and development-based company, we are looking at innovation with a purpose-driven innovation, so that it is not creating just economic value, or it is not just economically viable, it is environmentally and socially sustainable as well. And I have a lot of examples on that. We also bring this innovation, like these solutions, be it for land, be it for water, be it for biodiversity, at ground level, so that more and more land users or farmers who are our end customers, they can use these solutions. So businesses also disseminate solutions, or what we call commercialize these solutions, which eventually get disseminated. And thirdly, I would say business also play a role in creating jobs and employment. We often read about green jobs. I would say majority of these jobs are created through or via business because of the technologies which businesses are providing. So very briefly talking about true value of food, because Syngenta truly believe in this concept. It's a concept which is based on one clear aspect, that land and land products, be it food, feed, fiber, or biofuels, they are undervalued. the price of these products and price of land doesn't reflect the cost associated with it or the negative externalities associated with the production of, let's say, food. The price we paid often doesn't reflect or include the cost of biodiversity loss, the cost of water contamination, the cost of soil erosion. So what we are advocating is like we should have this concept of true value or true cost of food accounting so that the price would reflect what are the impacts on society and environment with the production, consumption, and distribution of food. And for that, what we are doing is like building coalition like within WBCSD, World Business Council for Sustainable Development, where we are bringing a couple of companies, organizations, research institutes to develop a universally recognized mechanism which will help us in setting targets and will also help us in accounting and reporting true value of food.
And Varun, if people would like to learn more about this true value, is there something on the website or a report that will be produced this year?
The report will be produced by end of next year. We are working, there are Nestle, there's Olam, there is Yara, there is Syngenta in this program. Oxford University is our research partner. We are working with them for almost 1 year now. The ultimate outcome will be, as I was saying, a tool, a standard which not only business but other entities could also use. And then we will produce a guidance document to effectively use this tool for different sectors. And one thing to mention here, like, which I would say a real value of this true value concept is like it will by default encourage good practices or adoption of sustainable soil management practices on ground if we talk about land conservation. And why I say so? Because like with these practices, the cost to environment and society is often less. There will be less of biodiversity loss if we adopt conservation agriculture practices. The IPCC report, which came last month on land use and climate change, clearly states that conservation tillage is 10 times more effective in reducing soil erosion than conventional tillage. It will be more effective, more cost effective in terms of water conservation. It will be more cost effective in terms of landscape connectivity conservation and so on. So by default, it will encourage adoption of good practices on ground.
Thanks, Varun, and we look forward to learning more about that particular project.
Thank you.
So if we think now from the large private sector, we're going to think a little bit more now about the other scale of the private sector, the all-important smallholders. And if you look at the chart, you've identified here that the smallholders are quite critical in sustainable land use management and value chains. So we'd like to ask Madhugani Sek, who's a specialist with the World Bank, to share some thoughts about how the public sector can support the small-scale private sector with some examples where she has worked quite effectively.
Thank you, Matthew. I would like to respond with a case of Arabic gum value chain restoration in Mauritania with the help of the World Bank GEF Sahel and West Africa program. Gum Arabic derived from acacia and has been used for 4,000 years in food, drinks, pharmacy, cosmetic, and many other sectors. It is deeply rooted in Mauritania's land and history, providing livelihood to many who depend on the sector. At one time, Mauritania used to produce nearly 6,000 tons of Arabic gum every year. But in the 70s and 80s, the drought and mass migration from rural landscape to cities cut down the production to only 500 tons. However, there are opportunities in the sector. Exports have tripled in the last 25 years, with Sudan, Chad, and Nigeria as being top, but with a paradox. They export crude Arabic oil at a very low price, but import it at a very high price. The World Bank and GEF saw an opportunity in the social economic potential of this value chain. This was made possible through the Sahel and West Africa program that is now in 12 African countries. How was this done? First of all, by linking small and medium enterprises with the private sector, but also by restoring degraded landscape, by promoting integrated landscape management, and of course, by addressing the social economic vulnerabilities to make sure that the poorest rural communities really benefit